Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today. I'm Jamie, that's Heath, that's Chris. We're looking at some players that may have disappointed you a little bit in Week 16, and we'll find out if you can trust them in Week 17. Let's start with a pair of Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski. We knew that they were going to be in a little bit of different spots. Brady lacking without Chris Godwin and Mike Evans there. Gronk may be benefiting because those guys not being there, and both were disappointments in the victory against the Carolina Panthers. Part of the reason why I liked Ronald Jones at the start of the week was I was expecting them to run the ball a little bit more. We certainly saw that, but still, Brady, 30 pass attempts, only 232 yards passing, 1 touchdown. Gronk was a disappearing act, which was unfortunate for a lot of tight ends this week, but Gronk, 1 catch for 23 yards on 2 targets. So Heath makes sense of these two guys, these two must-start players, usually going into Week 17 in a matchup against the Jets, a team that they know very well from their days with the Patriots.
Yeah, they're playing the Jets, so I'm probably just going to start Gronk and Tom Brady if I have them. But I do think that there's concern for both because of the lack of weapons. For Gronk, I think it's more that maybe if he's not surrounded by an all-star cast of wide receivers, he's not very good at getting open anymore. If Mike Evans comes back in a normal matchup, I'd feel better about him. Against the Jets, I think he can probably get open against them.
Hopefully they deliver. Again, you might have lost as a result of some of these performances, but if Brady and Gronk still are on your fantasy roster going into Week 17, the nice thing about it is the Jets are on the other side. All right, let's talk about Matthew Stafford, Chris, because we thought he was going to light up the Minnesota Vikings like most quarterbacks do, and he just did not look good throwing the ball. So now back-to-back weeks, under 20 fantasy points. He does get the Ravens in Week 17, and that has been a very good scenario for a lot of quarterbacks. Just ask Joe Burrow, who's passed for over 900 yards in 2 games against them. So Matthew Stafford, if you advance with him, can you trust him in Week 17?
Yeah, maybe we can get one of the Ravens coaches to disparage Matthew Stafford the way they did with Joe Burrow and light a fire under him. Like Matthew Stafford, remember, he had that stretch earlier in the season with 3 games in a row with a pick 6. He followed that up with 8 touchdowns and 1 interception in his next 3 games. So he's had these weird stretches where he's just made kind of completely dumbfounding decisions, especially near their own goal line. It's been weird. He's had like 4 or 5 interceptions within the 20-yard line, within the Rams' 20-yard line. It's been really weird. But I don't think there's much to take away from this. He's really good. He's got great weapons. He's in a great system. He just needs to cut down on the, frankly, dumb mistakes that he's made recently. And I don't think that's going to be an issue against the Ravens. They're so beat up. They're missing so many guys right now in that secondary. And we saw Joe Burrow have one of the best passing performances of all time. So I'm not worried about Matthew Stafford for Week 17 against the Ravens. And I did manage to survive his down week, so I'm happy about that.
Yeah, I think it just comes down to, will they just run the ball against Baltimore? We know that's not necessarily the easiest thing to do, but as Pete Prisco told you earlier in the show, that's what the Rams have become. They're very much morphing into a very good run team, and that's impacted Matthew Stafford certainly the last 2 weeks. All right, Chris, I'm going to stay with you on this one because I want Heath to defend Saquon Barkley. But in any event, let's go to the Packers running backs first here. So Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. They've been good. They just haven't been great because they're kind of cannibalizing each other a little bit. So if they don't score like they did against the Browns on Christmas Day, can you feel comfortable starting them? They get the Vikings in Week 17.
I'm much more worried about Dillon than Jones. Dillon's really only had one good half of football since Aaron Jones really came back from that injury after the bye week because, you know, it was the second half of Week 14, entering that game, the first half, Dillon had played like 8 out of 31 snaps. Second half, he ends up being the lead back, gets a bunch of carries, and ends up having a pretty good fantasy day. It's been pretty bad for him since then. Aaron Jones, he's still getting, you know, half of the passing routes. He's getting more carries. They're both involved in the red zone. So I do think Aaron Jones is the better fantasy option, but we had him as a top 6, top 8 running back coming into the season. He clearly hasn't been that. And I don't think he's going to be that moving forward. He's more like a mid-range RB2. I think Dillon's a high-end RB3 who probably needs a touchdown most weeks to really be a good fantasy option. So it's disappointing. The situation is confused, and I wish one of them would just take the job, but there's really no reason for the Packers to do that. So I think it's going to stay with the status quo.
And probably going to be the same thing going into next year, too. Another frustrating experience, especially if Aaron Rodgers is still there. So good luck with that with the Packers in 2022. All right, Heath, so coming into the week, you said Barkley was still a top 12 guy for you, if I'm not mistaken. Are you done with him at this point?
Oh, no. I think this coming week is entirely dependent on who they start at quarterback and whether Akeem Hicks is back for the Bears. Without Akeem Hicks, the Bears' run defense has been one of the worst in the league. With Akeem Hicks, they've been one of the best in the league. When Mike Glennon starts, he gets 7 targets a game. When Jake Fromm starts, he gets 1 target. It's so if Mike Glennon is starting and Akeem Hicks is out, then I'll start Saquon Barkley. He was averaging 80 yards a game and 4 catches a game with Mike Glennon.
You going down with the ship?
The ship wasn't going down until they changed the quarterback.
The ship has been going down pretty quickly for Saquon Barkley.
He was averaging.
He's not been a good fantasy running back.
The last
He's been
3
under
weeks with
60%
Mike Glennon.
snap share 3 weeks in a row.
Right, but the last 3 weeks with Mike Glennon as a starting quarterback, he was averaging 14 fantasy points a game.
You're sticking with it.
Yeah. If Mike Glennon starts and Akeem Hicks is out, I'm starting Saquon Barkley. If one of those two things is not there, I'm going away from Saquon Barkley.
Okay, so we'll see what happens with the quarterback situation. I give you credit. You're sticking with Saquon Barkley.
Stick with it.
We'll see if the Giants stick with Saquon Barkley. So just frustrating. Very, very frustrating for one of the premier backs coming into the season. Hopefully Mike Glennon starts and can keep Saquon Barkley somewhat afloat, but very tough to trust, and we'll see if Akeem Hicks does come back. He was on the reserve COVID-19 list, so could matter for this Bears defense. All right, let's talk about Cordero Patterson, Chris, because he's been bad 2 weeks in a row. Did score against the Lions, but the fantasy production has not been there for him. The catches have not been there for him. Can we trust Cordero Patterson going into a Week 17 matchup against the Buffalo Bills?
You know, the Falcons rightly got a lot of credit for being the first team in Cordero Patterson's career to figure out how to really use him on offense and make him into this do-it-all Swiss Army knife weapon for them. And so if we're going to give them credit for that, we also probably need to criticize them for the fact that they've really just used him kind of like a normal running back over the last 5 weeks. He's running a route on just 45% of the pass plays over the last 5 weeks. That's actually fewer than Mike Davis. Mike Davis is up over 50%. And he's lined up in the backfield on almost 70% of his snaps in that span. It was down to 55% in the first 11 weeks. Cordero Patterson, for what he's done as a rusher, it's been very impressive. He's been a good running back, but that's not the best way to use him. I think that's pretty clear at this point. And for whatever reason, whether it's because he had that high ankle sprain right around 5 weeks ago, and they just want to preserve him, he's not 100%, whatever it is, they're not using him the same way and the right way to get everything that they can out of him for fantasy. So I think at this point, Cordero Patterson, he's just a low-end RB2 for me.
Yeah, tough matchup. Again, even though we did see that the Bills have struggled lately with some opposing running games, it's been these teams that have a power running game, and that's not necessarily what the Falcons have. So Patterson could score. Obviously, he did this week, but the production's just been minimal. So we'll be interested to see if fantasy managers, again, if you advance with Cordero Patterson, if he'll still be in your lineups in Week 17. All right, Chris, great job. Thanks for being with us here, as always, on Fantasy Football. There.